IndyCar's TV show 100 Days to Indy premiered on the CW last night. I have a lot of thoughts. Let's get into it. Okay, so every motor racing series in the US and really abroad as well realized after Netflix's Drive to Survive, which is Formula One's television show, that they also needed a TV show, and they needed it yesterday. So we have seen in recent years a mad scramble to get TV shows pumped out that are similar to, if not exact copies of, Drive to Survive. And IndyCar struggled for a little bit to land a TV deal, a TV show TV deal, I guess we could say. They finally got one with the CW network, and they have been filming throughout this year. And we got to see the fruits of that labor yesterday night, at least everyone in the broader sense of the word. It was the premiere on television, and also just today the show premiered on the internet. And if you want to go check out the show, the link will be in the description to where you can see it on the CW's streaming site. I will just get this out of the way right off the bat. I think generally speaking, I would say that I feel positively about this show. Was it an absolute 100% home run? Is this a 10 out of 10 show? Definitely not. I will address some of my concerns with it later on in this video. But I think as a broad sweeping IndyCar 101 show, especially also as a first episode of a 6-part series, I think it did a very good job of explaining IndyCar in broad general terms and giving you a few stars that came off as very likable, which really isn't a surprise, and I'll talk about that later in this video as well. But they chose well, for the most part, of the drivers that they focused on for the first episode. And I'm positive about it. I'm not over the moon. And I should also say spoilers from here on out, because this is kind of weird where we're reviewing something that's not a live sporting event. So chances are you might be watching this video and maybe want to watch 100 Days of Indy episode with a totally fresh eyes and totally fresh perspective. So I will just say, I'm going to tell you what happens in the show from this point on. Now, that being said, the TV ratings for this are already out. They're about what I think most people expected. 200,000 people watched last night. Obviously, that number is going to increase, though it's probably not going to be that much of an increase through streaming. That is about level with what NASCAR's TV show did on USA Network. I think NASCAR got about 40,000 or more, or thereabouts, more people to watch. And really, I think that's a pretty good sign for IndyCar. At the very least, this show did not get completely trounced. I think 200,000 is pretty reasonable. And looking at TV ratings of CW shows, and specifically of premieres of CW shows, it's not bad. It's right about where a mid to lower CW show would slot in. It put it this way, it was not like a ginormous failure from a TV rating standpoint. So I think that positive right off the bat. Something that is kind of a hard number to interpret right now is that the 18 to 49 demographic, which is the most important TV demographic, and really the most important demographic in terms of any kind of thing, marketing, whether you're trying to sell something, those are the people that are going to be buying your products potentially for the next 50 years and beyond. Of the total TV audience that was tuned in for the hour that 100 Days to Indy was on, 3% of that was, or 3% of the 18 to 49 demographic was tuned in to 100 Days to Indy. NASCAR's show, which premiered last fall, doubled that, but when you're doubling that, you're talking about 6% versus 3%. So It's hard to know without knowing the total number of televisions that were on at the time to know exactly how many in the 18 to 49 demographic were watching this show. But just know that it was 3%. And you're going against the NBA playoffs, the NFL draft, a lot of tough competition. So TV ratings are what they are. I think a lot of people within the sport think that this show is going to have legs in streaming. And so that's an interesting point that I kind of came up with as I was sitting down to watch this, or about to sit down to watch it, is that I couldn't even remember the last time I'd specifically gone to the TV to watch a non-live sporting event. Like, any television that I watch is streaming or on YouTube. It's not on TV, and that's been that way for 10 years, and I'm not even 30 yet. So over a third of my life, I have already not been tuning in to watch TV. And I did this, I think the last time, because I think other people had kind of realized what the last time there was, and it was the last time for me too, was this season finale of Breaking Bad, series finale of Breaking Bad, which was in 2013. So 10 years was the last time I sat down to watch a TV show. It just tells you how much the world has changed. And, and thinking about that from the perspective of, will young people be attracted to the sport through a TV show? Probably not. Now, will they be attracted if it's easy to stream and there's good word of mouth? I think so. But that brings me to my next point, which is, before I started taking notes on this show, I wrote in big letters, this show is not for me or people like me. And it's not that deep. So I understand that these types of shows are not trying to attract me. They've either already got me or they realize they're never going to have me, because I'm a racing fan and specifically an IndyCar fan. So I'm never going to need a 101 course on all these things. The other thing is that, I'm going to try to not look too deeply into things. There are some things I think on a surface level they could have done better, but we're going to try to not get too far out in the weeds on what this show was trying to accomplish and what it actually did accomplish, if that makes sense. I thought the show started out very solidly. They started at the 100 Days Out party at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. They did a crash course on what the Indy 500 was, why it's important to win it. David Letterman narrated that. And then at the party itself, Doug Bowles was kind of introducing drivers and did a very good job. I wasn't actually at the 100 Days Out party, but seeing it for the first time, they did a very good job of allowing Doug to speak and showing what it's like, or what each of these drivers are like, what their accomplishments are, and why you should care about them in a very quick succession. The first actual driver that they focused on was Joseph Newgarden, and I'm just going to applaud the showrunners, because I've said Joseph Newgarden needs more focus forever. You can go back to videos from 2017 when he won the championship that I was screaming to high heaven, promote Joseph Newgarden, for the love of God. He's exactly what everybody says that they wanted as an IndyCar driver, and yet it seems like for the longest time Joseph Newgarden has not been promoted whatsoever. But this show did a great job, I thought, of promoting Joseph Newgarden. They definitely leaned into the beefcake part of it, shirtless Joseph. Sex appeal goes both ways, right? And so I didn't have a problem with that per se. I thought it was, if you're trying to kind of lean into a sort of pseudo drive to survive, you're going to need to try to get some thirst traps going, and it worked. But I think there's more to Joseph Newgarden's story, and they actually did tell it. One of the big things I've always thought is like a huge, interesting thing about Joseph Newgarden is he's married to a literal Disney princess, and they touched on that. And I thought, all right, cool. We know Joseph. We understand Joseph. We got him as a personality, as a driver, and as a father, as a husband, all those things. They checked every box from that standpoint. I liked it. Then they went to Marcus Ericsson, which makes sense because he's the defending Indy 500 winner. They had some interesting things with him at the Thermal Club. They didn't spend too much time with Marcus, though. because this was very much kind of the Bus Bros pilot episode, because the next driver they focused on once they were done with Joseph was Scott McLaughlin. And again, we know this. I would hope you guys know this from being fans of IndyCar, but Joseph and Scott are great personalities. They focused on a great, and yes, Bus Bros did make the work easy for them. The fact that the Bus Bros YouTube channel exists, the fact that Joseph and Scott already do a great job of self-promoting themselves. But the TV show realized that Joseph and Scott are two guys who are worth focusing on, worth putting a microscope on, and showing that they are real human beings as well as, championship race car drivers. I thought that was fine. I thought especially Scott seemed very fun, very energetic, a superstar. In fact, they both seemed like superstars. They did a good job of showing them off. Now, that being said, I think one of my first criticisms of the show, it's a double-edged sword with starting with the Bus Bros, because yes, that's the correct. I think they made the correct decision. I'll put it that way. But the rest of the show definitely feels like the Penske Pals Power Hour. Even like the Will Buxton types, or the people they were trying to make Will Buxton outside of James Hinchcliffe, were all very much the Penske approved, Penske clean. It felt like a very sanitized corporate show at times. It felt like they purposely were avoiding some dramatic things or some potentiality of drama. For example, they brought up specifically the Penske-Ganassi rivalry, which makes sense if you were making this show about the championship, because every championship since 2012, with the exception of 2012, has been won by a Penske or Ganassi car. But this show is about the Indianapolis 500, and it was very clearly meant to be an Indy 500 show. And even though they touched on it in the show, and it had specifically had Roger go, "This is not acceptable, we should be winning the Indy 500," Team Penske has not been competitive at the Indy 500 for 4 or 5 years. Not since Simon Pagenaud won in 2019. So if you're making a show about the Indy 500, the rivalry right now is Ganassi versus McLaren, not Penske versus Ganassi. And there's real drama and real beef between Ganassi and McLaren. And why that wasn't touched on immediately, I'm not sure. Maybe it's because they focused on the Bus Bros right off the bat. I don't know. That was a miss for me. Now, again, we're going to try to not look too deep into this, right? Because with these shows, we know that the racing is not going to be the focus, the forefront. It's not going to be presented or even really like shot much differently than you see on NBC television. A lot of flat, static shots in the racing. But I think one of the big things I would say is they missed a few major points in the race, or they didn't focus on the right things in the race. I guess I'll put it that way, or maybe emphasize the right things in the race. Now, I will say I think that this show will age well, and it will binge well. That was one thing that I noticed right as the racing portion started up. I said, you know what? I think when you can watch all 6 of these episodes all in a row, it will probably watch better than individually. But when we're watching it individually, and the point about Romain Grosjean winning the pole comes up, and knowing what I know about St. Pete and what all of you guys know, Romain Grosjean was a very important part of St. Pete, and the fact that they introduced it, or really didn't give him an introduction, was a head scratcher to me. And it was especially a head scratcher when you have the crash between McLaughlin and Grosjean. And, knowing what I know about racing, now maybe Scott doesn't particularly have a real beef with Romain Grosjean, though I think he was involved in some of the drama after Nashville last year. I know specifically like Joseph has made it pretty clear that they are rivals, Romain Grosjean and Joseph Newgarden. And if you had a Newgarden centric episode and an episode where Newgarden and McLaughlin are the best friends, best buddies, and then you could have, I understand you don't want it to be fake, but there isn't fake drama between Grosjean and Newgarden. I would have at least made a mention of Nashville last year. And it feels like the show really, really, really doesn't want to have a villain, which is, I understand why, because I understand the criticism of Drive to Survive. And I don't even know if Romain Grosjean is the right villain for this show. But a show with only heroes and no antagonist, no villain, is not going to be as compelling as one that does have one. The closest they got was Jenna Fryer making a suggestion that Joseph and Scott would eventually turn on each other, which I thought was a bit ridiculous and kind of out there, and that was kind of in the realm of Drive to Survive, kind of fairy dust, like, wow, well, maybe this could happen, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, but it probably isn't going to happen. I think there was real drama here that could have been utilized and wasn't for whatever reason. And I don't know. I felt like it didn't. And again, it's not that deep. I understand that, but I felt it could have gone a little bit more deep to dig up just a little bit of dirt, just to add a little bit of that normie bait, so to speak. I think the normies. I don't know if normies are going to latch onto the show. This was a great debate I had with Kyle today over DMs, and you guys are not going to be able to wait, I think, for the podcast when we debate this. But I think one of the things that Kyle and I discussed was, who is this show for? And Kyle's answer, and he'll elaborate on the podcast next Tuesday, is that he thinks it's for racing fans who aren't necessarily IndyCar fans. And I say, okay, maybe. I could see that. I'm just curious what a normal person would think of this show. I think they would be interested in the drivers, and I think the drivers carry it. There's no doubt about it. Now, again, it was a great decision from the showrunners to pick the drivers that they did. I think they focused on the right things with the drivers. They told the story very well leading up to the race. But once you get to that climactic moment, I don't think it quite had the oomph that it maybe could have had if we'd established a few other things that happened in the past year that would have really made it exciting. And then, by the way, if you set up that McLaren-Ganassi rivalry, oh boy, that Plenum event and Pato losing the lead sure does get a lot more exciting. So I hope this doesn't come off as negative. This is truly constructive criticism, right? I think there's not as much drama. It felt pretty clean and friendly, which maybe that's the vibe they're going for. But from a television perspective, we know what shows get viewers, and it's the ones with drama. There's a reason during the NFL draft that they just keep a camera on Will Levis sitting on the couch, not being drafted. It's dramatic. It's dirty. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but it keeps people glued to their TVs. So, yeah, again, I'm positive about that. I am positive about this, but there are a few things that I'm curious as the show goes on if they'll get a little bit more out into the weeds, if they'll get a little dirty. We'll see. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to seek this show out. I don't know if I'm going to watch it as each of the episodes premiere, or if I'm just going to wait and binge it later. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I've ranted for 20 minutes on this, so in this time you could have watched a third of 100 Days to Indy. But for the most part, it was a high quality, well produced show for the most part, and I think that's what most people want. So I would say they delivered for the most part in episode 1. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.